Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sonali Fahim. This is our moment of the conversation to lean into the fault line of global power. As money turns into a new battlefield and sovereignty gets rewritten in courts. Now, I'd like to invite our distinguished speaker to the stage as we dive into the politics of money, sanctions, sovereignty, and the new economic Iron Curtain. Please welcome His Excellency Boris Tadić, former President of Serbia. Mr. Peter Aukamp, entrepreneur, Rigilog AG, OceanSafe AG, Kingsrock advisor, Good Carbon. Mr. Mohammed Parvez Imdad, senior consultant and advisor. Mr. Sheikh Mohammed Daniel, Director, Sonali Life Insurance. Mr. Anarul Alam Choudhury, President, BCI. And guiding the conversation, our moderator, Mrs. Arya Nijat, co-founder and policy lead at iTicker. Please give a round of applause for the speaker and moderator.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, very good afternoon to you. My name is Arya Nijat, and I will be moderating this plenary session. Before we start the session, I want to congratulate the CGS team for enabling this opportunity for exchange of ideas, for learning, and for open dialogue, which I think is a true reflection of CGS's commitment to democratic debate. And I also want to thank you for extending this kind invitation to me. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this plenary session, which focuses on the politics of money, sanctions, sovereignty, and the new economic Iron Curtain. I think this session is offering us an opportunity to look at a part of the geopolitics that's often invisible, but it's incredibly powerful, and that's the financial system itself. We usually think about geopolitics in terms of armies, alliances, or borders, but increasingly the reality is that geopolitics and global power runs through payment systems, through reserve currencies, credit access, and the digital pathways that'll help keep the money flowing around the world. We're also meeting at a time when countries like Bangladesh are integrating with global supply chains, global compliance systems, and global markets. And because of that, this conversation is more relevant than before, because exclusion from the global financial network can shrink a country's strategic space as much as other traditional forms of pressure can. And across the world, due to these disruptions, we see that the system is shifting. While some nations are doubling down on the traditional methods of payment and finance, others are looking into alternatives, alternative payment systems, local currency arrangements, or digital settlement systems, all in an effort to gain a little bit more breathing room. And so today, our task in this session is to look back, zoom out a little bit, and look at the system itself. And we will do that through three rounds. In the first round, we will look at the system. We will look at how the financial system is reshaping sovereignty. In the second round, we will look at how sanctions are splitting the countries into competing economic blocs. And in the third, in terms of way forward, we will look at what options countries, industries, and firms have in the midst of this system reshift. To help us understand these questions, we have an exceptional panel. They come from public policy, industry, finance, entrepreneurship, and risk management. And each of them bring a different vantage point to this conversation, so I really hope that you'll find it valuable. I will briefly introduce the panelists. We have with us Mr. Anarul Alam Choudhury, who is a leading industrialist and the president of the Bangladesh Chamber of Industries. He brings deep insights into industrial competitiveness and export resilience. We next have with us President Boris Tadić, who is the former president of Serbia. He has also served as Minister of Defense and Minister of Telecom in a few other roles which are very interesting, a teacher, a journalist, and a clinical psychologist. He's known for steering his country through complex times and advancing its Europe integration agenda. And by virtue of these roles, he brings deep insights on statecraft, strategic negotiations, and managing the political economy of sanctions. He's currently serving as advisor to the CEO of VEON, which is a telecom player with considerable global footprint. We next have Dr. Mohammed Parvez Imdad, who is a seasoned economist and policy advisor with extensive experience in government and multilateral development institutions. His work covers country programming, regional cooperation, governance, and development financing. We next have Peter Aukamp, who is an entrepreneur and strategy leader with a background in investment banking and sustainable industries. He serves on many roles currently, so I don't know how he juggles that. He serves on many senior roles with companies operating in climate and nature investment, sustainable material innovation, and global financial advisory. And last but not the least, to my very right is Sheikh Mohammed Danial, the director of Sonali Life Insurance and a business leader in the garment sector in Bangladesh. And he is known for championing digital innovation and financial inclusion in Bangladesh's private sector. To open the conversation, I want us to begin at the system level. And my question to all the panelists, and I will start with President Tadić, is, are we entering an era where sovereignty is negotiated through financial system rather than diplomacy? And what does that mean for countries positioned between major geopolitical currents? I'm hoping that President Tadić will, given his experience of negotiating between major geopolitical blocs, will respond to this, having witnessed the financial pressures that sanctions create on countries.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. My suggestion to organizers is to put one speakerphone here in front of us, because we don't have a good opportunities to hear what you're telling us right now because of rumors in this room. Anyway, second, the sanctions are existing after Second World War, and when the financial system we are living in was established. Bretton Woods, famous meeting, that was almost at the end, before the end of the Second World War, in order to prevent any financial problems and economic crises that can affect the world after war. But in fact, that system has been functioning as an instrument in the hands of the main financial powers, United States and other Western countries until nowadays. And my country, as Serbia, was under sanctions during the 1990s war in the former Yugoslavia. And just before having this panel, we talked about that. I was explaining that even though the countries and the politicians that has been imposing sanctions on Serbia in that moment, expecting that we are going to have a more fragmented society, and that they expected that our leaders in that time are going to lose supports of the ordinary people. Reaction of ordinary people was totally different. They were more coherent, more supported the president of Serbia, Milosevic, in that moment. And whoever is thinking that sanctions are going to make more fragmentations within every single society, I think it's a failing. Nowadays, we are talking about famous sanctions against Russia, and this is also one moment which is showing really naive of the Western world, expecting that Russia is going to be weaker and not that coherent society. I think that the situation in Russia is going to be totally opposed to that expectations. But this is only instrument, a financial instrument, on which the Western countries are counting for a few decades, and I think that also innovations in that respect can be very helpful right now, if we want really to have a kind of instrument to solve problems, especially conflicts we are facing with all together for example, in a war in Ukraine. If you're talking about sovereignty, this is very fragile issue and the very specific phenomena. Sovereignty is based on financial system of every single country, but because of Bretton Woods rules, we are not living in a real world where sovereignty is possible. We are living in an interconnected world, and with the system of IMF, World Bank, SWIFTs, and the way of paying our bills, we cannot count on real sovereignty. Countries today can count on some measures that can defend themselves in the world in which we are living, but not very efficient measures. Many people are thinking that cryptocurrency can be kind of tool that some sovereign country can use in order to provide a better financial system, more solid and more stable. But cryptocurrency is also a very fragile system, and that cannot be foundation of such measures, and I'm not sure this is possible. Because we are facing with the kind of domination of the United States and other Western countries that are following the financial agenda, we have Aukamp, which is BRICS countries, and the BRICS countries are trying to replace the dollar as a currency, global currency, but we'll see what is going to be final outcome of the BRICS model and BRICS projects. But all in all, even though we are living in the world which was under domination of United States and the countries that have been following US dollar agenda, I think that living on the crossroad of the two different political models and geopolitical models, we can expect some crucial and substantial changes. But I'm not sure that even though this is crystal clear that we can expect some crucial changes, someone can predict which kind of changes we are going to be faced with in the future. And this is one of the most interesting dilemma and the questions nowadays, because that fact, how new architecture of financial world is going to be formed, is a crucially important for the future of the world. We'll see. I'm very much curious to see what is going to be final outcome of that critical moment in the history of the mankind. But this is some of the most important questions regarding new architecture and new world orders.
Thank you, President Tadić. Dr. Imdad, if I can come next to you, and please feel free to react to what the President said, particularly in terms of sovereignty being fragile in the domination of the US dollar, and that there are changes coming, but there are uncertainties associated there. What, for countries that, given your economy background and your decades of experience as an economist, for countries that heavily rely on external financing, what happens to their policy autonomy in this environment?
Thank you, Arya, and members, my colleagues, the members of the panel, and guests. Thank you very much. Well, first thing I'd like to say is that after the Second World War, when decolonization started, the process of flow of economic assistance engineered an impact of support from resource-based countries to newly independent countries that were decolonized. There starts the point, that's the point of the flow, process of flow of capital. Capital to support development, social and economic development. So that trend continued, and then we find that the political authority was an integral part, has come in to influence the flow of money. Even in terms of economic assistance, the question of political closeness, proximity, or being in the same alliance or being in the same stream of social and economic as well as international policy dimensions. The unanimity of views was a factor for getting more assistance. Till then, sanctions was not seen as a very important element. After the Cold War, when the Cold War was on, sanctions started to be seen visibly in some cases. But after the Cold War, when the Cold War was gradually diminishing or reducing, we find sanctions becoming a sort of, not common, but sometimes used in case of relations between developed and developing nations. In response to your question and the points made by our distinguished guest, I feel sanction may have impact, but its adverse impact stems from diversity of factors. What is the nature of the sanction? Its scope and magnitude, and it's based on what? Now, it has its own stages, focus, and its own dimensions. That is, the object is to punish or to get some sort of agreement to which someone has not agreed to. And having said that, there are ways of, we haven't seen sanctions used rather only for monetary or fiscal, in monetary and fiscal dimensions. But the impact on the countries is visibly, the impact is very severe to those countries who face sanctions. So in that case, I think what the countries could do to face such situations is to strengthen their own economies and to generate economic surveillance, which is more easier now, monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. I'll just humbly share my own experience during the Asian financial crisis in 1997. I was working in the Asian Development Bank. The major international organizations had a huge difference of opinion. That was not sanctioned per se, but that was a financial crisis. But I'm just comparing it, though it's not fully comparable. And for quite some years, Malaysia, Singapore, and most other countries of Indonesia, mainly Malaysia and Singapore, who were middle-income countries, I mean, they were without any assistance from the key international development, partners. But they went for quick economic surveillance mechanism within themselves to cushion external shocks. At the same time, they generated financial strength within their own economies. But that was not sanctioned. What I'm trying to say is that if we go back again, James Keynes, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, he said after the Second World War, the general theory of employment, interest, and money is only to guard against the impact of the Great Depression. But a time may come when countries may face serious fiscal deficits due to relations with other countries, how to manage their own affairs with other countries who matter to them in terms of flow of resources. So the question here is that countries should be internally strong, have strong macroeconomic indicators, should have and build up economic and financial resilience. Even without sanctions, these are necessary conditions for inclusive development. So, and another important factor that the country should make, those who face sanctions should make a risk assessment or mitigation impact, how to mitigate risks. The thing that most countries may take time, those who face sanctions, is to strengthen informal sectors that do not have much bearing through the sanctions. Then you have an alternative stream of economic activity that will generate support to the overall stream of development financing. I'll stop at that at this moment. But if you have anything further to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Imdad. These are interesting points. You highlight that it's important to look at the nature, scope, magnitude, and purpose of sanctions. in that, in a nutshell, the way forward should focus on building internal resilience, economic resilience, in order to have more maneuvering power. Chaudhry Sahab, if I can come to you, since Dr. Imdad just talked about building internal resilience, you are a leading industrialist and the president of the Bangladesh Chamber of Industries. You interact with private sector in Bangladesh on a daily basis. What does this shift look like from your point of view, from the vantage point of view of Bangladesh's export-dependent industries?
Thank you. Everything is talk about the sanction. You know, what gonna be consequences? It been happened before, and what gonna be happen today, especially country like Bangladesh. See, the sanctions, let's put it this way, that is against whom and for what? This is a economic power game. It's between the China and the America. And then it been the way Mr. Trump have taken it up, that he have gone with a tariff, by using the tariff, reverse back to the WTO system, which was giving a protections to the developing nations, you know. And now what we're gonna be see is that the individual country is going to be negotiate each other who have the interest and benefit will be getting a benefit out of it. Like Europe, for example. India is now FTA, doing the FTA with Europe. Vietnam is doing the FTA with Europe, with a UK, you know. And this kind of things is now happening very fast. And Europe is also, UK is already had a FTA to the India, and they are trying to take the benefit, you know, both the side, they are seeing their economical benefit. And with the Trumps, there is another things, because they are fighting with the China, and because of the China, he has given a de-risking supply chain, because high tariff makes the China to take a shape on their own economy structure. So he goes back with a resources like AI or the cobalt, you know, all those things. He's not trying to increase it and giving an impose over there, so that America is having a problem over there. And now the Americans are trying to give a sanctions with their Russia-Ukraine war, because of the Russian-Ukraine war and the Iranian, the oil sanctions, and the third country cannot use this oil from the Russia. So you see, these are all the big power game. And the country like Bangladesh, who are actually, you can say, just a developing nation, from the LDC to the, we are graduating gradually with the middle income group. For them, it is not been touched, in a sense that Bangladesh economy is totally based on RMG sector, and which is totally with a Western and US base. So, with the US tariff, yes, it's been affected to us also, but we are so far, we are at a par because with our competitor country. But now when we can see that Thailand is getting a zero tariff, because America has an interest with the Thailand, what shall I say, the cobalt, you know, and Thailand, Malaysia is also getting a zero tariff. So that Vietnam is still with us. So there is we can see that block is coming up gradually. The block as such is what? Block is, we can see the block about China, then the Iran, then the Russia one block, plus some others. On the other hand, Europe, America is one bloc. So Bangladesh is in this position. Bangladesh business people, they are now trying to see that so far we are not being touched, but we have to take our preparations that with the it's an opportunity for Bangladesh in a sense. Because of de-risking, the supply chain has been shifting from China to anywhere else. Bangladesh could have taken this opportunity to grab the Chinese investment in Bangladesh or from the other countries' investment, because the Bangladesh having with a labor-intensive, or you can say we are 180 million people, and labor-intensive industry is very much viable over here. And Bangladesh is so far got stuck with a three sector. One is the remittance, one is agricultural industry, and then the RMG sector. RMG so far is not been affected, but RMG, they are trying to take a shape in order to extend their market in a different region, but the growth will be not that much, I think, maybe 5–10%. But we have another headache is the employment. So automation of the agriculture sector, if we don't do it, agriculture so far is doing pretty good, but we have to address with the automation in the agriculture sector. And then we have to find out our another fourth pillar of economy, and that is a engineering sector, light engineering sector. So we have to have now move forward, and we have to address how to develop the skilled manpower so that the light engineering industry we can go, which ultimately will give a opportunity for the Chinese to shift their industry in Bangladesh or India to shift the industry in Bangladesh, And Bangladesh would be able to take this benefit. So far, as I say, that we don't have been affected that much because we are totally dependent on as far as the export is concerned with the US and the Europe. But for the future, I think that we have to be concerned about to explore our market, more growth to the China or India. So during that time, maybe our currency will also be affected. So far it has not been affected. But in order to this, what shall I say, the sanctions problem occurring, we have to prepare ourselves because our biggest import partner is the China and the India. So the Chinese yuan or the Indian currency, we can try to be exchanged when we do the trading with them instead of using our dollar. But for the future, I think that Bangladesh is in such a position, or the mentality of the entrepreneur in this country as such, that it's a resilient nation, and we can able to find out. But provided we need a government policy support. Unfortunately, the time what is happening globally right now, we are having a big earthquake in our country. That is our political shock because of the interim government is here. They cannot take any decisions with the policies as far as the policy is concerned. But the entrepreneurs is waiting now that when the political government will come, maybe we can try to work it out and how to face in the coming days as the crisis is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaudhry Saab. That's a very practical and forward-looking approach, particularly insisting on the need to diversify in terms of access to supply chains and markets. Peter, if I can come next to you, you work across sustainability and financial investment sector. How tangible the impact of this economic iron curtain you think is in terms of the operational realities of the private sector in the sectors that you focus on?
I think for individual countries, this can be, individual companies, this can be quite a question of life and death. But I think at an aggregate level, and I think for all these companies as well, they will find ways around, probably faster than sovereigns or nation states can, right? And I mean, if I may add to what the previous speaker said, is that, you know, sanctions, it's always a question of what type of sanctions and who is supporting them. And if you look at the financial system, then I believe we are now in the last days of a unipolar financial world, right? And so therefore sanctions become much less and less effective. And as President Tadić and Professor Imdad said, I mean, you just need to look at Russia, right? And how the heavy sanctions imposed by the West have affected the economy, right? I mean, one fact I was looking up is 2019, before the invasion, Russia was pumping a little bit more than 11 million barrels of oil per day. In 2024, they were still pumping more than 10 million barrels of oil per day. So that's a reduction of less than 10%. And that's less a result of sanctions, but much more so because OPEC had agreed an 8% cut in 2023. So basically, there was a negligible effect of the sanctions. And then on the other hand, you know, sanctions rely on a network effect. And so if not everyone supports the sanctions, that means they become much less effective. And so nowadays, it's not necessarily that people are recipients, that you have a coalition of sanctionees, but in this case, you have a sanctionee and a number of non-aligned states, and the number of non-aligned states is very large. And if you look at the most prominent and most active trading counterparties with Russia these days, it's also a very unlikely alliance of non-aligned states. I mean, this consists of China, India, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel as the, you know, who are the largest trading partners now for Russian oil. And you would normally not find them at a strategically aligned table as a group, right? So I think what you sometimes have from these sanctions are unintended consequences. And these unintended consequences are that you build up competitive systems and therefore probably accelerate the end of a unipolar financial system.
Thank you, Peter. This is an interesting intervention in the sense that sanctions lead to unintended consequences, which defeat the original purpose for which the sanctions were actually imposed. Chaudhry Saab had a very positive approach when he talked about how Bangladesh's private sector is dealing with the disruptions in the financial global system. From your perspective, as a young leader in the Bangladeshi private sector, working in the garment industry and the insurance industry, and I'm sure there are plenty others, from your point of view, how politicized has the monetary environment become, and how does that affect the work of the companies that you interact with?
Right, so thank you very much. I really liked what Chaudhry Saab had said, or who I fondly refer to as Parvez uncle, and I would like to take this opportunity to wish him happy birthday because it's his birthday today. He's
Shall we sing?
Yeah. So he's a legend of the industry. We've always looked up to him. He's been very close and dear friend to my late father-in-law, who always supported me and who would have been here if he was alive today. But to the question of how do we deal with this fallout of financial risk across industries, stemming out of whether it is tariffs or sanctions. Now, one of the industries in Bangladesh, or I would say rather one particular industry in Bangladesh, was the energy sector that got affected. Because of the sanctions, the tariffs, the piling effects of all of it, our first and only nuclear power plant in Bangladesh at the Rupur power station, now that was developed by the Russians, and they got sanctioned. Now you still have to honor the commitments because it's a G2G project, but they didn't know how to make those payments. So the government actually literally had to take extreme measures in order to make sure that the project gets finished and the Russians get paid. But in doing so, it indirectly depleted a lot of its foreign reserves, which created a very volatile market for import-based businesses as well as for export-based businesses, and which has created another parallel issue about the value of the currency. So once the value of the currency erodes, the purchasing power of the country erodes along with it, and we have seen the knock-on effect of that in terms of inflation, and that inflation ultimately increases the wage rate of the workers, and which directly impacts into our floors, factory floors. So I always have this belief that when it comes to policy making on a global stage, on a geopolitical stage, the foreign affairs offices in Bangladesh get to know about it much later. But at the factory floors, we know it much earlier. We feel the effect of it. It affects us, it affects our prices, it affects the way we deal. You know, for the last 40 years, or a bit longer than that, the garments industry in Bangladesh shaped the industrial landscape in Bangladesh. What we have learned throughout this entire period is that there's a global order, and it is a global village, and you go out into the world and you try and find the best price for the best product and the best services so that you can assemble the best product for your factory, for your buyer. Now, we are not natural manufacturers. We're not supposed to be garments manufacturers. We don't produce cotton. We're supposed to be fishermen. My father always says, you know, if things would have gone the other way, you would have been a fisherman, so be lucky with what you have in life. And that's true. I would have made a very bad fisherman because I don't like fish, but nonetheless, we're very lucky because of the ingenuity, because of the perseverance of our people, of our previous generations. You know, my grandfather, for him, the battlefield was on the factory floor, getting the machines, getting the raw material, and getting the people to work. For my father, the battlefield was access to market, with the quotas, with getting the right sort of advantages. But for my generation, it's all about algorithms now. At the end of the day, who's the last consumer, and how do I get the product delivered? How do I get my payments across the ocean, across the pond? Now, what wonderfully he has explained Mr. Thiel had explained about the unintended consequences. One of the unintended consequences was India becoming a partner to Russia as well as to China in all of this, very unlikely. But India still has that capacity to form alliances. But a country like Bangladesh, we are too small of an economy, too small of a nation, not in terms of population, but at least in terms of density, in terms of the landmass, to actually form proper alliances. And if we had alliances, we could have protected ourselves and we would have been able to develop. Now, if you look at the richest economies in the world, whether it's the US or the European market, they formed that sort of a alliance in order to protect themselves from global shocks. And most of these shocks originate from themselves, but they are well protected. But a country like Bangladesh, or a country like Vietnam, a country like Cambodia, these economies, they need to come together in a pack in order to sustain the global shocks. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened because there's not enough political will. Perhaps there's not enough global understanding of economics in the country. But we hope that in the coming future that will change. And one must really thank the organizers of CGS of putting up a platform like this where such discussions can happen and future can be developed. And one more thing before I end, I must thank the organizer for another thing, for having the courage of doing this. Because there was a time not too long ago when the state machinery was really after the organizers. I don't know if they're here, some of them might be here, but they were after them for basically discussing these very topics in order to take the country forward. If you don't have critical thinking, if you don't have discussions where you discuss the future possibilities and the threats that your economy faces, then you don't develop. And that's where that rut is where Bangladesh was, and hopefully in the future we will get out of it.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I completely concur that CGS does deserve a round of applause for this conference and for the previous years, and for the amount of coordination and dedication that goes into putting all of this together. You had a very people-centered response. You talked about factory floors, you talked about wages, and you talked about just at the end, what is all this about, if not for the well-being of the people? And what Peter said also about unintended consequences, that's a kind of a good segue into our second round, which focuses on unintended consequences. And Peter, I want to give you the opportunity first, if you want to add to the already discussed unintended consequence, if you want to add any additional ones, because there is a growing debate about the era of over-sanctioning and whether it's being overdone, sanctions and counter-sanctions, and they just continue until one of the powers would back off. In addition to what you discussed, particularly from the private sector point of view, what else could be on the unintended consequences of the over-sanctioning that we may be entering?
Yes, absolutely. No, that's very interesting. I think in terms of over-sanctioning, what we are seeing and the acceleration towards a less unipolar world in finance is also that these non-aligned groups of nation states, they come together and kind of build competitive systems. And instead of punishing one country, you end up building up a competitor. And if you look at it in this term, then it's more about the short-term switching cost that are painful. So while you go through a transition, while you move away from a dollar clearing system to another system or whatever type of system you want. But it's initially about building the infrastructure to build more resilience. And in the long term, once the infrastructure is built and the hardware is in place, the software of sanctions and of penalties becomes much less threatening, right? Because you can play on different fields. And I think that also might be a great opportunity for a country like Bangladesh. As a smaller, medium-sized economy, Bangladesh would never be perceived as a threat of building up its own bloc in the world order. And I mean, for your industry, probably the markets in the US and the European Union are the most important. And if you look at industrialists or companies in the private sector in these markets, they look for supply chains that are different from those supply chains of the past. In the past, it was all about efficiency, just in time, right? As efficient as possible. And now it's going more into an area of where you have just in case. You don't want to be reliant on a supply chain in China because something could happen tomorrow. You don't want to be reliant on a supply chain for commodities from Russia because just in case. And I think Bangladesh is perfectly positioned to become one of these just in case places because it's non-threatening. And therefore it will always be there as a reliable partner, potentially. Correct. So I think that might be a very, very interesting perspective in this time, right? And I think, the switching costs to kind of highlight that with the fact, there are different countries in Latin America who face similar situations. For example, Brazil, 2018, 84% of the internet traffic of Brazil was routed through servers in the United States. This share of internet traffic has come down much further and further, and now infrastructure is being built with direct cable links between Brazil and the European Union, with Brazil and Africa, and then Africa is being linked up with India, and therefore, while this is an expensive infrastructure investment, this will provide independence and more sovereign powers to these countries in the longer term.
Thank you, Peter. I'm also looking at the time we have in this round. Particularly, I want to give the opportunity to, maybe I'll first go to President Tadić to briefly hear from him, based on his experience running a whole country. Are there any blind spots that governments face when trying to manage such pressures? In the face of, for instance, Daniel talked about how difficult it became to honor a G2G commitment. What, in your opinion, are blind spots that governments may face while trying to manage the political economic dynamics of sanctions?
This is depend on the regime, which is existing in some countries. If this is democratic regime, this is a different reaction. If this is dictatorship, again, the very different reaction. But the main issue for every regime is how to keep coherent society and how to avoid the distortion and the many protests and very bad outcome of the sanctions. But all in all, I think that a reaction of ordinary people and all governments are counting on them is going to be to support the ruling party and the government in the moments of sanctions. What the countries that are imposing sanctions are expecting, this is totally opposed to that. Because people are behaving, this is a normal reaction, in a dangerous situation in the same way. They are more coherent, they're trying to defend themselves, and they consider their government as a pillar of their security in that moment. Regarding sanctions in Russia, I think that the Western countries are totally failing. Totally failing. They think that Russian citizens are going to withdraw their support to the Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. And I think the situation is totally different, totally on the other side. But maybe if sanctions are going to be sustainable and in the long term can have a kind of impact of behavior of society, those sanctions can have an impact on economic situation. But this is something very different from the behavior of society and reaction of society. You can have a weaker country, weaker economy, weaker living standard, but also people can behave in a totally different way. They can be more coherent and more supportive for the current regime. And this is about psychology in politics. And if I may say, as a psychologist, the reaction of ordinary people is very controversial in political field. We are expecting the people are behaving in a rational way. If we are economists, if we are coming from economical sector, and we are expecting that people are going to think about how much they are going to earn this month, and what about their income and something like that. But psychological behavior in politics is very rational, much more emotional than rational. And this is why I'm suggesting to the political leaders that are counting on sanctions to have a different option. And they are totally failing. And this is why, in the beginning of the war in Ukraine, I'm totally against the Russian intervention and the war in Ukraine. But I'm also totally against sanctions, because we have to understand what is going to be final impact of those sanctions. The Russian society is not going to feel that the Western world was treating them in the fair way. They have their own problems and their own reasons why they consider Ukraine as a potential enemy. In the long term, if we are adding sanctions to that, and specific treatment from the Western medias, the Western world is pushing Russia far away. And this is extremely dangerous in the interest of the Western world. Because if you consider some country enemy,
I think your microphone is...
I've come into the crucial moment.
Yeah. So while we're fixing the mic, I think one of the takeaways that at least I have personally is that all governments should have expert clinical psychologists on their policy teams, because we're dealing not just with consequences in the economy, but also how to...
No, everything is... I mean, we are living in a interconnected world, and economies depend on psychology of emotions of rational attitude. But if you are putting some country and the citizens of this country under sanctions, if you are considering them as an enemy, if you are treating them in the media and international media as an enemy, you are pushing them far away from you. If the Western world is pushing far away from themselves, Russia is going to be a more dangerous country in the future. The strategy to put enemy far away from you is a very bad strategy. With your enemy, you have to have a closest relations. If your enemies are far away from you, your enemy can be very dangerous. Your enemy is not counting on how you are going to react if that enemy is going to attack on you. If enemies are closer to you, all impacts of his attack on you, that has to be considered as a potential threat for your enemy also. If you are treating enemy in a totally irrational way, you are creating more dangerous world in the future. And all in all, I think the whole strategy of the United States and the Western countries regarding war in Ukraine is very bad, very bad. If we are adding to that sanctions, media treatment, political rhetorics, for example, rhetorics in which you are defining we are civilization, you are enemy of civilization. This is very bad rhetorics, and this is very bad attitude, and the final outcome can be not peace, sustainable solution, but more problems in the future.
Thank you, President Tadić. In the interest of time, and I also want to just take a count, are there any questions in the audience? Yes, there are. Okay, so let's locate the mics. I will go back to Dr. Imdad, Chaudhry Saab, and once last to Daniel on the way forward, on strategies that would help countries realistically deal with these situations. Dr. Imdad already added that internal resilience building is very important. If you can briefly, if you want to add any other points, sure. Way forward.
Thank you. I was just thinking about, and in fact, a very important tool would be RCI, Regional Cooperation and Integration. Unfortunately, this should have worked very well, but in our part of the world, as of now, the impact of RCI is not strong enough, especially in South Asia, possibly because of India and Pakistan's dispute over Kashmir, or SARC and its instruments have not been able to produce that. I was, in my own humble way, I was working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when SARC was formed in 1985. And when we were preparing the documents, we had so much of dreams, hopes and aspirations that SARC could transform the region from poverty to efficiency. But as I look at SARC now at this stage of my life, I think ASEAN would be a good example for SARC. Similarly, regional cooperation and integration could be a way to reduce impact of sanctions or other adverse economic impact. I won't go into the details. Other point, Arya, I'd like to mention is that there was talk about a national economic assistance strategy and policy assessment by ERD. I'm not sure whether it has been done as yet. I think it's high time to look at the impact of economic assistance for countries like Bangladesh. I'm quoting a figure of 5 years back. Actually, the total amount of foreign economic assistance to Bangladesh is less than 5% of the GDP. Please correct me, you all are very well informed about it. It's only 5%, less than 4.5 or something. This is very important. On the other hand, we feel that international organization money is coming in, they are helping our key sectors and all that. So we need to assess and look at, revisit from the governance perspective. And CGS has reminded me this would be a very good work for CGS and all others who are supporters and who like CGS can help in that. Thirdly, I fully agree with Mr. Daniel and Mr. Anwar Parvez. The private sector is critical for us, actually. I would say it's extremely critical. Especially, I will be very, specific. If we don't make up a third or fourth generator of GDP, other than, remittance and overseas employment, overseas ready-made garments, RMG and remittances. These two drivers have become tired. So we need to, and for that, the private sector needs to be supported in the manner that it's not the conventional support, so that they can generate capital, further capital, and they can create additional sources for economic diversification of countries like Bangladesh. Lastly, I'd like to say, thanks, for your patience for giving me this time. Lastly is that I believe side by side, the safety nets is something that the next budget, after the elections, I think the next budget, on one hand, should give substantive support, hear the voice of the private sector. I think there are a lot of sessions with them, but what they are trying to say, it means a lot for the country. See, our garment story is a story of tremendous success. Many countries can learn from Bangladesh, but at the same time, corruption, wastage of resources, inefficiency in the past have really caused a lot of damage. So my point is, it's time to look at the strengthening the private sector, economic diversification, and this also holds true for the whole of Bay of Bengal area, who have got similar economic structure. Safety nets and food security is something which should be very important, because food is the front line of human survival. So that, I think, should be important. And of course, as we all know very well, people at the center of all reforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. Chaudhry Saab, would you like to add any strategies that you recommend in terms of way forward?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to say that for Bangladesh perspective, because it is very important that it is not only important for us, this country is important for other country too, because it's 180 million people, and its economy size is not too small. It's a $560 billion market, and 30% are middle income group. So this is also attractive for other country too. But on the other hand, for us, we have to believe, or all the industry people also believe, that we have to be very, very competitive in order to produce any product, And though we have in a mind, or though we have already working to put up other sector to keep growing, like as I said, light engineering or blue economy, or halal goods, things like that, or IT even, So it is very important that the government has to be really active. And the nation actually needs the government mindset to be changed in order to be competitive over here. And globally, the government also, they should have taken a neutral policy. I mean, for us, it is better to pursue the beamstake, as he have pointed out, that regional cooperation. Everybody is doing the regional cooperation will be very much needed right now. ASEAN, we can try. The SAARC, it didn't work out, but why not we try to work with India also? Because India and Bangladesh together is a huge number of population than the ASEAN population, if we look at it. We have to keep continue with the Chinese, because that's also a big market for us. It has to be in our mind. And for example, UK and USA market, they will also need us. It's not that they can left us, because they also need this market. And at the same time, we need their market too, through our RMG sector. Today, it is very important for us, but so we have to make it very, should not lose that market share over there through our competitiveness. Then the China and India, we need their big support also for our infrastructure or IT, things like that. Here, we can get a big support, which we won't get it from the Western world, maybe, because they will fight for them, their own interest. Oil is their own biggest control over here, they need to be control on the oil, they need to control with the IT sector, AI and things like that. But we don't have that kind of ambitious plan, but at least AI technology, we can bring it from the China. The semiconductor, we can maybe try to work in Bangladesh, that we can work with the China, and we should not, be very reluctant over here. Then the market diversifications. I think that it is very important that we should have, even in the garments, even with the other trades, we should have moved out, we should develop our own internal market dependency. We have to build up our market. Instead of import substitute product, we should have concentrate over here. So in order to do it, I think that what we will expect from all of you and also from the audience, that we must, because during this period it is a big opportunity for Bangladesh to take the economic benefit. And in order to do it, let's try to pray that we should have an election and the democratic process should come forward, and only then Bangladesh industry, Bangladesh economy will survive. Whether it is an autocracy or it is a democracy, I don't care. Because whatever good for our economy, that is more important. Autocracy all over the world, maybe a lot of people have seen, even a Korean development comes because of the autocracy. Even a Taiwan economy comes with the autocracy, So, but on the other hand, democracy is always been a good for any of the nations, but the process takes time to take any sort of decisions to be implemented, or in any policy to be implemented. So let's pray for all of us that at least we should have come across with a election process, and otherwise we may lose a big opportunity which is ahead for us.
Thank you, Chaudhry Saab. Daniel, both senior economists and industrialists of Bangladesh have given us a long list of strategies. What would you like to add to that?
Well, I was listening very carefully, and I think towards the end, Parvez uncle mentioned something very interesting, that for an economy, it doesn't matter if you are heading towards a democracy or an autocracy, and it probably comes, or these sort of thought process usually stem from a bit of frustration with democracy in general, because it takes time. Check and balances always takes time. And as a result, a lot of times, autocracy seems to be a very attractive proposition. However, we have flirted with autocracy for the last couple of years, almost a decade, and the end result is we have not really built on anything other than garments industry. And the garments industry's building blocks were built basically in the late 70s and in the early 80s. And while we were talking about financial issues that we are facing today, one of the financial issues that the garments industry in Bangladesh faced back in the 80s, early 80s and late 70s, was a lack of capital. Now, this is a very interesting concept that was actually developed here locally by the local bankers and the brilliant entrepreneurs such as Uncle and my forefathers. By forefathers, I mean anyone who started the garments industry. I'm the second generation. So in that way, a lot of the first generation garments manufacturers, they realized that the biggest need for capital and the shortage of it was in terms of working capital. And so let's say you set up a factory for 300 machines. It's not going to cost you a lot, but it's going to cost you a lot more, like 10x, just to get the raw materials running the factory for 3 months. So what they did, they invented a policy called the back-to-back LC policy. You bring a master LC from your buyer, And then you leverage that LC and you open up to 70%, 80%, depending on the relationship. And you also get a PC, which is packing credit. So you pay your salaries. So that is the way you were able to, this industry was able to become as big as it is today. The scalability was because of this financial marvel that was basically created because of a local problem. The one issue where, in theory, we have moved away is that we have become overtly reliant on foreign consultant. And one of the problems with foreign consultants is that they're filled with MBAs who know a lot of things but really don't know about anything. So you need to know the ground reality. Now the ground reality is when you face a problem, you try and find a native solution to it. A solution that will work in New Delhi might not work in Dhaka. A solution that might work in Beijing might not work here. So these sort of problems that you see has happened in elsewhere, you can take probably an example out of it, but you can't really copy and paste it in Bangladesh because Bangladesh is very different. So for me, what I would love to see is, of course, a sustained democracy for the next couple of decades, at least, hopefully longer. But more importantly, I would also like to see self-reliance and building up our own system, our own ecosystems, whether it is through blockchain payment systems so that we are not cut off from the payment gateway system. Tomorrow, if due to non-alignment, if we are also sanctioned, you never know. Because we were just discussing earlier that a couple of years ago, you used to look at a country's policy-making decision history. Now you wake up and see what Mr. Donald Trump is tweeting. And based on his mood, things can change. Yesterday, $2.7 trillion was wiped out of the US markets. But the headlines were he was greeting Mamdani rather cordially. So that kind of changing of perspective, changing of storyline, we need to also adapt to it. We need to have our own independent, native solution to our problems. We need to become more independent. If you look at various industries, it's not just garments industry, there are various other industries that are flourishing. I'm part of insurance industry, both life and non-life, and I can say very proudly that I'm part of a company that serves over 1.1 million customers and is the fastest to claim settlement. It's a little company named Sonali Life Insurance Company, and then they've done brilliantly. But the problem that we see suddenly now, while we are fastly evolving, serving 1.1 million customers, suddenly we see that because of a lot of changes that's happening globally, the reinsurance capabilities have suddenly become very difficult to get the best rates, to get the best coverage. And you see recently we had an accident in the export village inside the Dhaka International Airport terminal. Even then, we had a difficulty accessing proper reinsurance. So at the end of the day, what really needs to happen is policy making for the betterment of the industry, deregulation of industry. One of the key aspects as to why garments industry was a success was garments industry was never really regulated by the local regulators. And hopefully other industries will also get the same sort of benefit in terms of policy rather than subsidies. What we need is policy support from the government and an understanding. So hopefully we'll see that in the next couple of days.
Thank you so much. You continue to maintain your people-centered voice, which is very, very important. So the organizers told me to end the session, but I requested if we can have one question. Okay, come. There are 4 people standing. No statements. Just please state your question, all of them, and we'll just take one round and that's it. Please.
Yeah, my question was about the diversification of our foreign reserve. Like, given the sanctions and everything, there's a volatile situation that's going on. Almost all our foreign currency is based on US dollar. And so, with the changing scenarios, isn't it better that we have a diversified foreign reserve, I mean in gold and other currencies?
Okay, diversified foreign reserves, whether that's a good idea or not. Sir, yes, please state your question. And sorry, very sorry that we have to
Good
do it
evening.
quickly.
This is Tanvir Mohammed Dipu. I am from private sector. Can I ask a different question to the Excellency of President Serbia, ex-president. Once upon a time, USSR, United States of Soviet Russia, maximum European countries were engaged in USSR. But now the time, maximum European countries are trying to join the European Union. EU enlargement, they are ready to member to EU. So my question basically, will this European Union enlargement, will this EU enlargement be long lasting? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, but we'll have to just take these two questions. So the first was whether it's a good idea to have diversified reserves. Who from our experts can take this question? And then the second question was for President Tadić, and we'll go to that at the end.
You see, our export is about $44 billion. And our import is almost like a 60, if you are last financial year take, it's about $62 billion, you know. And our import is $62 billion. Our import, about 31% is coming from China, 14% is coming from India, and the rest is mostly with some is Brazil, some is Mexico, and also Middle East country. So when we can see that our trade, the trade pattern, then we can see that for us it is better to have the dollar in reserve. Of course, maybe some quantity, because with India and China, our export is not that much compared to the import what we do from China or India. China, we are exporting only $900 million, and we are importing almost like $18 billion. And from India, it is a $2 billion we're exporting, and about $10 billion we are importing. So in Indian currency, we can keep something, we can trade off, and with the Chinese, maybe some of it. But so far, for us, it is better to have still with a dollar, and some of it, definitely for our own safety, some diversification if needed. I think that Indian and the yuan, we can keep it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. President Tadić, would you like to briefly respond to the question on EU enlargement?
One of the main reasons why we wanted to join European Union was to change the structure of our economy. The foreign trade deficit was huge in Serbia, and that was making our society weaker, our economy weaker, and we wanted to join the European Union and to have a balance in trading deficit. And we did it during the negotiations about our membership. But regarding strategic issue of enlargement of European Union, right now we see new moments. First of all, second term of Donald Trump is bringing in European Union a totally different atmosphere. When Donald Trump have said, if you are not contributing to the NATO with a higher budgetary expenditure, 5%, more than 5%, we are not going to be anymore your protector. That immediately changed whole atmosphere in European Union nowadays. Second, when Donald Trump was raising taxation also for European Union countries, that created something very different in comparison with the previous time. And in that respect, European Union has a first time guess that they are alone and they have to project their future as a totally new entity separated from United States, and economy of United States, and defense strategy of United States. And we'll see what is going to be final outcome of that, and in that respect, what is going to be with enlargement process. But all in all, I think that European Union failed in terms of enlargement process, because if European Union is not going to be completed, if there are empty zones on the European continent, for example, Western Balkans, some other players are going to come in this very sensitive zone of strategically and geographically of European countries, European continent, and finally European Union. There is no empty space, neither in human cells nor in politics. If European Union is not going to be on the Western Balkans, in Moldova, for example, Turkey, Russia, or China are going to be there. If Turkey, Russia, and China are going to be there, European Union is not going to be coherent and able to find strategical solutions for the poor problems and challenges European Union is facing with. And finally, what is characterizing enlargement process last decade? Enlargement fatigue. European Union citizens, they have a fatigue because of migrations and because of economic problems and political problems, and this is not very popular to think about enlargement right now in European Union. But formally, European leaders and the members of European Commission are saying enlargement process is continuing. But in fact, in reality, after Croatia, we didn't have an enlargement process. Croatia was named in the book of Huntington, Clash of Civilization, which was mentioning that only Western Christian countries are political civilization. If that is the strategy of European Union, I think European Union is going to fail massively and strategically, and that entity and that phenomenon is not going to be able to compete in global arena economically and in terms of geostrategy and in terms of defense. I can continue in many different directions, but right now I'm stopping because I want to see my country as a member state of European Union. I do not want to see European Union leaders to refuse my country.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your participation. Please join me in thanking this people-centered, forward-looking, and very practical discussion on the politics of money. Thank you so much, everyone.